Germany filed a war crime complaint about this weapon in 1918. They said it was too brutal for combat. What weapon terrified them so much? The 12-gauge shotgun. And that same gun sitting in your grandpa's closet can hunt a rabbit or stop a grizzly bear. It can win Olympic gold. It can protect your family. It's the only gun that does everything. Today you are finding out exactly why the 12-gauge is unbeatable. Let's get into it. First things first, what exactly is a 12-gauge? And why do shotguns use gauge instead of caliber like rifles and pistols? The gauge system actually dates back to the early days of artillery, when cannons were named for the weight of the round ball they fired. The same principle applies to shotguns. A 12-gauge means that 12 lead balls, each with a diameter equal to the bore of the shotgun, would weigh exactly 1 pound. So if you had 12 lead balls the same size as the inside of a 12-gauge barrel, they would add up to 1 pound. This might seem backwards at first. The bigger the gauge number, the smaller the barrel. So a 20-gauge is actually smaller than a 12-gauge. A 10-gauge is bigger. Think of it like fractions. 1/12 of a pound is bigger than 1/20th of a pound, right? Same logic. The 12-gauge has a bore diameter of 0.729 inches, or about 18.5 millimeters. That is the sweet spot. Not too big, not too small. And that perfect size is exactly why it became the most versatile shotgun gauge ever created. Now, there are other gauges out there. The 10-gauge is bigger and more powerful, but it is heavy and kicks like a mule. The 20-gauge is lighter with less recoil, but it does not pack the same punch. The 16, the 28, the 0.410 bore, they all have their niche uses. But when you want one shotgun that can do everything, that is the 12-gauge. No contest. The 12-gauge did not just appear overnight. Its story goes back centuries. Smoothbore firearms loaded with shot first appeared in 16th century Europe as fowling pieces. By the 1700s, the British were using them for hunting large birds, with what we would now call birdshot. The term shotgun was first used in Kentucky back in 1776 to distinguish these weapons from rifles. But the real revolution came after the Civil War. That is when American innovation took over. In 1875, the double-barrel shotgun was invented, and it changed everything. It was breech-loaded, used purpose-built shells, and was devastatingly effective at close range. This is where terms like riding shotgun and coach gun come from. Guards on stagecoaches carried these guns to protect strongboxes. Short, powerful, reliable. Then came John Moses Browning, the legend himself. Between 1887 and 1900, he designed the first lever-action, pump-action, and semi-automatic shotguns. And here is the crazy part. The basic designs Browning created over 100 years ago are still used by every manufacturer today. The pump-action shotgun you can buy right now is fundamentally the same design Browning invented. World War I put the 12-gauge on the global stage. American forces used pump-action shotguns in the trenches, and they were so effective that Germany filed an official diplomatic protest, claiming they violated the laws of warfare. That is how devastating they were in close-quarters combat. Through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and into modern conflicts, the 12-gauge has been there. From jungle warfare to urban breaching, from guard duty to special operations, this shotgun has proven itself in the harshest conditions imaginable. And that military heritage, it directly influenced the civilian market, making the 12-gauge the most trusted, most tested shotgun gauge in history. power and performance. Okay, so why is the 12 gauge so powerful? What makes it stand out? It all comes down to payload and versatility. A 12 gauge shell can hold between 5/8 of an ounce and 2.5 ounces of shot. That's an insane range. You can load it light for target practice with almost no recoil. Or you can load it heavy for turkey or waterfowl with maximum stopping power. Most shells travel between 1,200 and 1,500 feet per second. That is plenty of velocity to get the job done. Whether you are hunting or defending yourself, here is where the 12 gauge really shines. Because of its larger bore diameter, it can handle bigger pellets and more of them compared to smaller gauges. This means denser shot patterns at longer distances. If you are shooting at a duck 50 yards out, that 12 gauge is going to put more pellets on target than a 20 gauge would. More pellets equals better chances of a clean, ethical kill. The 12 gauge can also accommodate every shot size you can imagine. From tiny number 9 shot for close-range quail, all the way up to triple-aught buckshot for deer or home defense. And do not forget, slugs. A 12 gauge slug is basically a massive bullet. It hits harder than most handguns, and it rivals large rifle cartridges in stopping power at close range. Want to hunt small game like rabbits or squirrels? Load up some number 6 shot. Going after pheasants or grouse? Number 7 or 7.5. Ducks and geese? BB or triple B shot? Turkey? Number 4 or number 5. Deer? Buckshot or slugs? Home defense? Double-aught buckshot? One gun, all of that. That is the 12 gauge advantage. And modern ammunition. Technology has only made it better. With advances in non-toxic shot for waterfowl and tungsten super shot for turkeys, the 12 gauge's effective range keeps expanding. Hunters are now taking geese at distances that would have been impossible 20 years ago. Versatility in action. Let's talk about what the 12 gauge can actually do. This is not just about numbers on paper. This is real-world performance. Hunting. If you could only own one shotgun for all your hunting needs, it has to be a 12 gauge. Seriously. It is the only gauge that can hunt everything from tiny woodcock to massive white-tailed deer effectively. For upland birds like pheasant, grouse, and quail, the 12 gauge offers fast target acquisition and plenty of shot to bring down birds at varying ranges. Duck and goose hunters love the 12 gauge because it can throw heavy loads of non-toxic shot at high-flying waterfowl. Turkey hunters rely on it for dense patterns at the head and neck for instant kills. And deer hunters use slugs or buckshot for serious knockdown power. The best part? You can use the same gun for all of it. Just change your choke, swap your barrel, or load different shells. That is it. Home defense. When it comes to protecting your home, the 12 gauge is a beast. Loaded with buckshot, it delivers multiple projectiles with each pull of the trigger, giving you a much better chance of stopping a threat quickly. The sound of a pump-action 12 gauge being racked has deterred countless would-be intruders. Unlike rifle rounds, buckshot is less likely to over-penetrate walls and hit innocent people in the next room or apartment. You still need to be careful, but it is a safer option than many high-powered rifle cartridges. Law enforcement and military units around the world use 12 gauge shotguns for close quarters situations, breaching doors and less lethal options like beanbags and rubber projectiles. If it is good enough for professionals, it is definitely good enough for home defense. Sport shooting. The 12 gauge dominates competitive shooting. Trap, skeet, and sporting clays are all designed around the 12 gauge. Yes, you can compete with other gauges, but the 12 is the standard. Most top shooters use 12 gauge guns because the extra weight helps them swing smoothly. And the slightly heavier recoil is actually easier to manage in a heavier gun. Olympic shooters use the 12 gauge. World champions use the 12 gauge, the best of the best. Trust this gauge to hit targets traveling at insane speeds, tactical and military. As mentioned, the 12 gauge has been a military staple for over a century. Modern tactical shotguns are used for breaching, crowd control, and close quarters combat. Special operators carry them because they are reliable, powerful, and effective in situations where a rifle might be too much or a handgun not enough. Law enforcement agencies issue 12-gauge shotguns as standard equipment. They are in nearly every patrol car in America. Why? Because they work. Simple as that. Comparing the competition. Now, I know some of you are thinking, what about the 20-gauge? I have heard that it is pretty good too. And you are right. The 20-gauge is good. It is lighter, it has less recoil, and for certain applications, it is an excellent choice. If you are hunting upland birds all day and carrying your gun for miles, a 20-gauge will be easier on your shoulder. For younger shooters or those sensitive to recoil, the 20-gauge makes a lot of sense. But here is the reality. The 20-gauge is more specialized. It is great for specific tasks, but it cannot match the raw versatility of the 12-gauge. When it comes to power, the 12-gauge wins. It throws more shot, heavier pellets, and maintains effective patterns at longer distances. For waterfowl, especially geese, the 12-gauge is superior. For deer hunting with slugs, the 12-gauge hits harder and is more reliable. For home defense, the 12-gauge delivers more stopping power. The 20-gauge is limited to smaller buckshot sizes, usually number 1 or smaller. The 12-gauge can handle triple-aught, which is massive. When you need maximum impact, there is no substitute. What about recoil? Yes, the 12-gauge kicks harder. This is important. You can load a 12-gauge down to 20-gauge levels. There are light target loads, 7/8 of an ounce or even lighter, that make a 12-gauge shoot like a 20-gauge. You get the versatility of being able to use light loads or heavy loads, depending on what you need. With a 20-gauge, you are stuck. You cannot magically make it throw more shot or handle bigger buckshot. Ammunition availability. The 12-gauge dominates. Walk into any sporting goods store, any gun shop, anywhere in America, and you will find 12-gauge shells, tons of them, every conceivable load. The variety is unmatched. You will find 20-gauge, but the selection is much more limited. What about the 10-gauge? Sure, it is more powerful, but it is also heavier, more expensive, and punishes the shooter with brutal recoil. Plus, modern 12-gauge 3.5-inch Magnum shells perform nearly as well as the 10-gauge anyway. The 10-gauge has become a niche gun for hardcore waterfowl hunters. That is it. The 16-gauge, the 28-gauge, the 410 bore. They all have their fans, but they are specialty guns. The 12-gauge is the all-arounder, the jack of all trades. And in this case, it is also the master of most of them. Real-world advantages. Let's get practical. What does all of this mean for you, the person considering buying a shotgun? Availability. You can find 12-gauge shotguns everywhere. From budget-friendly pump actions like the Mossberg 500 and Remington 870 to high-end competition guns and tactical semi-autos, there is a 12-gauge for every budget and every purpose. The used market is flooded with them. Parts are everywhere. Gunsmiths know them inside and out. Ammunition. We already touched on this, but it is worth repeating. 12-gauge ammo is the most widely available shotgun ammunition on the planet. You will find it in every gun store, many sporting goods stores, and even some general retailers. Because of high demand, Prices stay competitive. You can find cheap target loads for practice and premium hunting loads for the field. Resale value. Because 12-gauge shotguns are so popular, they hold their value well. If you ever need to sell, you will have no problem finding a buyer. Training and resources. Want to learn how to shoot a shotgun? Almost every firearms instructor teaches on 12-gauge platforms. Online tutorials, books, videos, they are all geared toward the 12-gauge. Finding information is easy. One gun solution. This is the big one. If you can only afford one shotgun, or you only have space for one shotgun, or you simply want one shotgun that can do everything, it has to be a 12-gauge. Nothing else comes close to its versatility. You can hunt every game species in North America with a 12-gauge. You can defend your home. You can compete in sports. You can go to the range for fun. All with the same gun. Just swap barrels, change chokes, or use different ammo. Can you do some of that with other gauges? Sure. Can you do all of it as effectively? Absolutely not. Addressing the drawbacks. Now, let us be honest. The 12-gauge isn't perfect. No gun is. The biggest complaint is recoil. Yes, 12-gauge shotguns kick harder than 20-gauge or smaller bore guns. Heavy magnum loads, especially in lighter guns, can be punishing. If you are recoil sensitive or have a smaller frame, this can be a real issue. But here is the solution. First, you can choose a heavier gun. Weight absorbs recoil. A 7-pound or 8-pound 12-gauge will kick noticeably less than a 6-pound gun. Second, use lighter loads for practice. Those 7/8 of an ounce target loads are incredibly soft shooting. Third, modern recoil pads and stock designs significantly reduce felt recoil. Fourth, semi-automatic shotguns spread the recoil out over a longer period, making it feel softer. With the right gun, the right fit, and the right loads, recoil becomes manageable. Weight is another factor. 12-gauge shotguns are generally heavier than their smaller gauge counterparts, and the ammunition is bulkier. If you are hiking 10 miles into the backcountry for ptarmigan, you might prefer a lighter 20-gauge. That is fair, but for most hunting situations, especially waterfowl in a blind or deer from a stand, weight is not a huge issue. And if you are hiking, modern, lightweight 12-gauge guns close the gap significantly. The other drawback some people mention is that the 12-gauge is overkill for small game. And yes, if you blast a dove with a 3-inch Magnum turkey load, you are not going to have much meat left. But that is user error, not a gun problem. Load appropriately for your game, and the 12-gauge performs beautifully. So here we are. We have covered the history, the power, the versatility, the applications, and the comparisons. And the conclusion is clear. The 12-gauge shotgun is unbeatable. Yes, other gauges have their place. The 20-gauge is great for specific applications. The 28-gauge is a beautiful upland gun. But if we are talking about pure, raw versatility and capability, nothing touches the 12-gauge. It is not hype, it is not marketing, it is history. It is performance. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.